Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new Python tutorial series. So in this series, I'm going to be teaching you the basics and fundamentals of the Python programming language, and we're going to immediately be applying those into our own project/game. So the idea behind this series is that not only do I want to teach you these concepts, but I want us to actually apply them into a project so we can see where they're used and how we use them. So at the end of this series, you will have a complete finished game that you will be able to show off. And the way that we're going to be making this game makes it really extendable and flexible so you can add your own stuff and really customize it as we go through. So before I say anything else, let me just note that this tutorial series is really for complete beginners. This is for people looking to get up and running in Python as fast as possible. And in these next 3 videos, we're going to be learning a bunch of different skills and syntax. And then by the end, we're going to have that complete project. So let me show you an example of what this project could look like. Keep in mind, this is just like kind of a smaller version of what it might be. This is very flexible and we might make it a little bit different as we go through. So let me run this. And the type of project that we're really making here is a choose your own adventure game. Now, in my opinion, this is one of the best projects you can work on as a beginner because of how flexible it really is. So let me just show you what it is, and then you guys should get an idea pretty quickly of why this is a great project to work on. So you can see it says, welcome to my first game. What is your name? I'm going to put Tim. What is your age? Let's put 19. It says, you are old enough to play. Do you want to play? Let's type yes. It says, you are starting with 10 health. All right, let's play. First choice, left or right? Let's decide to go left. You can see that what's kind of happening here is these first steps we're just setting up in the game, but now it's going to give me a bunch of decisions to make. And based on what I choose at previous steps, it'll give me different decisions. So I decided to go left here. It says, nice, you follow the path and reach a lake. Do you swim across or go around? What do we think? Do we go across or go around? Let's go across. So I go across. It says, you managed to get across, but you were bit by a fish and lost 5 health. You notice a house in a river. Which do you go to, the river or the house? So let's decide to go to the river, and let's see, you fell in the river and you lost. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how this works. Let me run it one more time and I'll show you that there's different options that will pop up based on where you decide to go. So Tim, 19, yes, you were starting with 10 health, let's play. If I decide to go right, notice that immediately I just lose, right? So there's all these different paths and kind of decision trees and branches that we can go down. And it makes this game really cool because it's pretty simple to create, obviously, for beginners. That's what we're going to be doing. But it's also really cool and really flexible, and you can kind of make whatever you want out of it. So with that being said, we need to get our coding environment set up here. Fortunately for us, we're actually going to be using a platform called Replit. So it's repl.it, so repl.it. This is an online browser-based coding environment. And I'm just going to walk us through how we can actually set this environment up and get started right away without having to download or install any software. So as I mentioned, we're going to be using an online coding platform called Replit. So it's spelt repl.it. That is the website URL. I will link that in the description as well. But this is a free browser-based coding environment. So what that means is that the only prerequisite for this series is that you have a browser and you have internet connection. And it doesn't really matter what that browser is. In fact, you can actually do all of what I'm going to be showing you on your phone. So that's really cool. You can do that on an iPad, any mobile devices, which usually you wouldn't be able to do. So what is Replit? Well, really, it's just an online browser-based IDE. Now, you don't need to know what IDE stands for, but what this allows us to do is just get up and running really quickly. We don't need to install or download anything, and we can just pick a programming language and start coding. So I'm going to walk us through this platform and show us how we can get started, but I just want to pitch a few of the features for this platform because first of all, it's free and I think it's a really cool thing to use, especially if you're a beginner and you just want to get started really quickly. So you can see that the feature list is kind of here. It has an in-browser IDE, so that's what I'm talking about with that coding environment. It has real-time collaboration, which means you can actually invite someone to your project and you guys can work on the same code at the same time, which is really cool. It has GitHub integration. I won't talk about that because most of you probably don't know GitHub if you're following this tutorial. 50 plus languages. Again, that's pretty cool. So you can write in whatever you want. You can host and deploy applications. There's a bunch of tutorials and learning resources on this site. There's team plans and then APIs and plugins. You might not know some of these things, so don't worry about them. But let's actually get started and create our first REPL. So to get started, you need to go to this link and obviously sign up if you don't have an account or log in. So I'm going to log in, but when you sign up, it's going to ask you to input your favorite programming language. I would recommend you just select Python. It doesn't matter, but that's just something that you will have to go through to get this set up. So I'm going to sign into my account and then we'll be right back and talk about the actual platform itself. So I just signed into my Replit account and now I'm kind of on the home page here. I just wanted to walk you through some of the features and kind of things that this site has that you may not know about or that you might actually want to use. So the first thing I want to say is that if you just want to get started, the fastest way to do that is just to hit create a REPL. So you can see there's Python, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Java. These are the languages I selected as my favorite programming languages. And to get started, just press one of them and it will boot you up right into that online coding environment. Otherwise, you can go to the new REPL tab here, and there's like a bunch of different ways on this site to make new projects, which are kind of called REPLs, but this is how you can do it as well. Now, other than that, there's actually a ton of other things this site has that aren't involved in kind of the coding environment side of things. So first of all, if I go to this talk tab here, you can see there's actually a little bit of a kind of community space here. So I want to call this almost like a mini forum. It has a few different tabs here. So there's some announcements, there's challenges, tutorials, right? You can look at all these different things, which I think are pretty cool. And of course, you can make your own posts. And then if we actually go here and we select on our little logo, you can see that's my little drawn picture of me. And I go to profile. This is actually where all of your REPLs will stay and where you can kind of have a little portfolio to show off all of the stuff that you've done. So at the end of this kind of tutorial series, you're going to have a project right here on your portfolio that you can just link to and show off to whoever you want. So you don't have to actually send them the code. You could just send them a link to your REPL or to your profile. And it's kind of a little portfolio that shows off the stuff that you've done. And I think that's pretty cool and a really easy way to kind of share your work with other people. Of course, if I go back to the homepage, you can even see it says explore trending REPLs, and you can have a look at some cool projects that other people have worked on and get some inspiration, motivation, whatever. And then if you want to learn, of course, follow along with some tutorials. So the last thing I'll say is that if you're interested in working with some frameworks, Replit also has that as well. So you can see that there is some game development frameworks, one of my personal favorites, which is Pygame here. And then there's GUI development, so Tkinter, that's a Python module, Java Swing. I just wanted to show that there is some modules and graphics libraries you can use on here, which are pretty cool. And then, of course, my REPLs, when you start creating projects, this is kind of your storage space. So the reason I wanted to point this out is because usually when you work on a coding project, you're doing it locally. That means, say you're out, you don't have access to your computer and you want to work on it, well, you're kind of out of luck. With Replit, all of this stuff stores right on the website. So it's pretty easy to just sign in on your phone or sign in on your laptop or whatever other device and just start working on your project right away. So anyways, I think that's gone through some of the core features of this site. There's of course a few more, but let's actually get started and create our first REPL and first project. So I'm going to go here to new REPL and I'm going to select Python and give this a name. Now the name that I'm going to give mine is first game. Feel free to name yours whatever you'd like. And then just notice that this will be a public REPL, which means it'll show up on your profile and everyone can see it. If you want to go for private REPLs, that is kind of a premium feature, but I wouldn't worry about that. We're not making anything that we care if someone steals. So let's go create REPL and let's boot up into our first environment. And I'll just talk about some of the pains and kind of what exists in here so you guys know what I'm working with as we go through this series. So there's a bunch of different things to talk about. I'll go through them quite quickly. The first thing is you can see this pane on the side is kind of like your menu bar, right? So you have this little drop down list. This toggles the menu, I believe. Okay, yeah, so that's the other menu. And then you have files, version control, packages, debugger, and settings. If you know what those are, great. You'll appreciate all of these. I'm not going to talk about them in depth. The first one is files. So files is where you can make your Python files. For our project, we're just going to have one file, but sometimes you'll have multiple files. Sometimes you'll have some kind of project directory, so some folders, some other files inside of there. So that's how you kind of navigate that with this tab here, and you can just create them by doing that. Then what we have is settings. So settings is what I like to go into right away whenever I boot up a new editor and just modify it a bit. You can see I've actually already changed my settings from light mode, which is this, to dark mode. I just prefer dark mode, but you guys are welcome to use whatever you'd like. You can also change the layout from side to side to stacked. I like side to side better to do this, but again, all preference. Font size, you can change that to huge, you can change that to normal, whatever you want. Indent type, same thing, not a big deal. I usually go indent size of 4. This is default 2. And then other than that, I think that's about it. You can turn off the auto completion if you want from Code Intelligence, but those are the basic settings. Next, we have the two panes here. So you can see I'm toggling this bar just by hitting on the same kind of logo here. And now we have the coding environment on the left-hand side of my screen and our Python console or shell on the right-hand side. So this shell on the right-hand side, or console, whatever you want to call it, is where our code will actually run. So we'll write our code over here on the left. So maybe we'll do something. I'm just showing you a really quick example, like print hello. And when I press this run button up here, it will actually execute whatever code I wrote here and show it in the console. But another cool thing with this console is you can clear it just by hitting that button, and then you can actually write Python code inside of here. So I can do something like print hello right inside of here, and this will execute directly inside of here, and we're going to use this later in the series. So with that being said, I'm going to change this back to dark mode, and I think we're pretty much ready to start coding. So let's actually get into it and kind of start the tutorial. All right, so the first important thing that we need to understand is how we can actually print things and get things to show up in the console. So before, remember how when I ran the code, we would see some kind of output, right? It said like, do you want to play the game? Or it would tell us some kind of message. So how do we actually go ahead and do that? Well, the first command we're going to learn in Python is known as print. So all of the things I'm about to show you are pretty much called syntax. Syntax is really like the grammar of a programming language. It's like, where does the period go? Where do we have parentheses? It's just the structure, the way that we write the code. And if you hear me use the word syntax, that's what that means. But the syntax to print something out in Python is really simple. We just put print, we put an open parentheses and a close parentheses, and then inside of the print statement, we put a set of single or double quotation marks, and inside of these quotation marks, whatever we want to print to the screen. So you can think of it as like we're printing a quote, right? If you wanted to say that, although this is going to be referred to as something else that I'll talk about in a second. And whatever is inside of these quotation marks, that text will just show up in the console. So if I say hello world, the classic first program, then let's run, and we get hello world popping up in the console. So this is the easiest way to print something out. There's a bunch of other ways we can use this statement, but again, it's just print, open parentheses, and then you need these double quotation marks or single quotation marks. Doesn't matter which one, but make sure the set is obviously the same, so you don't go like single quotation mark, double quotation mark, that won't work. And then whatever inside of here that you want to print out. So let's apply this now immediately into our project. Like I said, the first thing we want to do in our choose your own adventure game is probably introduce the user or whoever's playing to the game, right? So what I'm going to say is welcome, if I could type, welcome to my first game. Now you guys can obviously put whatever you want inside of here. I'm just going to say welcome to my first game. Maybe you want to be more creative and put the name of your game, although we might not even know what that is yet. But don't worry, we can always go back and change that. All right, so print welcome to my first game. Great, so that is the print. Now what I need to talk about is variables and data types. Now this is a really important concept. Now this is going to be a little bit more theoretical. It's hard to apply this, but we definitely need to understand this. So inside of Python, we kind of have four main types of information or data. So in our programming languages, we have data, right? That's information that we're maybe going to store, that we're going to pass around, that we're going to manipulate. If you think of an application where we're just counting, say we're just counting up, well, we're going to have some notion of like what the count's at, right? That would be an example of data that we're going to store in our program. There's lots of examples of this, but this data that we have has different data types. And there's kind of four main ones that we need to cover. So the first one is string. The second one is int. Then we have float, and then we have bool. Now a string, which is represented by str, I'll actually just type out string here so you can see it fully, is anything wrapped inside of double quotation marks or single quotation marks. So like hello is an example of a string. Hi is an example of a string. 89 is an example of a string. Anything that's inside of double or single quotation marks is a string. And strings are just a collection of characters. They're just text, right? And usually we're going to use strings just to print stuff out to the console. There's a bunch of other use cases of them, of course, but for now, that's what we can kind of think of as strings. Next, we have ints. Now, ints are any whole number. So just the number, they're not wrapped in quotation marks or anything like that. Just any whole number. It could be negative as well. That's totally fine. It could be a really big number. Any whole number that does not have any decimal points is an int, otherwise known as an integer. So that kind of follows our understanding from math. So hopefully that one makes sense. Next, we have float. Now a float is any number that has a floating decimal point. So if I have something like 6.0, that's a float because we have a decimal point and then something after it. If we have a number like 7.5, that's a float. Negative 9.8, that's a float. And negative 100.0, again, a float. So even if it's a .0, which technically is still a whole number, right? Because 100.0 is a whole number. If it has this decimal point anywhere, it's considered a float. And lastly, we have a Boolean. A Boolean is one of two values, true or false. So these two exact things that I typed, nothing different about them. So the capital T and the capital F is very important. If you see one of these two things, and you can see they're kind of highlighting in blue, telling us they're a fancy thing in the language, then those are Booleans. So I'll leave this and what I'm going to call a comment, which is actually interesting to show you guys. So if I do 3 quotation marks, and then I do another 3 quotation marks like this is actually what represents a comment, or a multi-line comment inside of Python. This isn't super important to understand, but what this means is that whatever I wrap inside of these triple quotation marks, and I can put these anywhere I want, this will just be ignored by my program. So right now we're going to print this, right? And that's going to work fine. But if I were to wrap this inside of triple quotation marks, we can see it kind of gets commented out. And now that means our program is just going to ignore whatever's inside of these sets of triple quotation marks. So if I run my program, I no longer am printing that out. And there's actually another way to make a comment as well, and that's to use a pound sign. And what this does is simply comment out one line. So it just comments out whatever comes after it on the line. This sometimes is useful if you just want to comment out one line, not a whole block of code like I've done here. So I'll leave this down a little bit at the bottom of the screen, and now we'll actually start writing a bit more code. So there we go, we understand data types. Now we need to talk about variables. So variables are essentially a way of storing data. Now, you can think of a variable like in math, right, where we had like x equals 5, x equals 7. That's a really similar way that they work here in programming. And to make a variable, I'll just show you a few examples. It's quite easy. You simply pick a name for your variable. In this case, let's say x. You put an equals sign, and on the right-hand side, you put some data type, or you assign it equal to another variable or some other things that we'll talk about later. But essentially, you put something on the right-hand side that you want to be stored in the variable. So in this case, maybe I want my variable x to store an int, which is the value 5. Awesome, there we go. That's all I need to do to make a variable x that stores the value 5. Now, if I actually go ahead and write another print statement here, which is totally valid, we can write as many print statements as we want. What's going to happen now is we're going to print welcome to my first game. We're going to read the next line, because we do read code top to bottom most times. Other than certain circumstances, but you can think that when we execute the program, we read from the top, so left to right, top to bottom. That's just the way it works. So then we do this, we set x equal to 5, and now what I'm going to do is actually print x. Now notice that I didn't surround x in quotation marks. The reason I didn't surround it in quotation marks is because it's a variable. So a variable is actually something that I can print totally fine right inside of the print statement, because I'm not trying to print out the letter x, I'm trying to print out whatever the value is that's stored in the variable x. So in this case, I'm going to print out 5 because x equals 5. So if I run this, let's have a look. Welcome to my first game, 5. Awesome, there we go. We now kind of understand variables. So of course, I can store other things in variables too. I could store the value true, right? This would be considered a Boolean or a bool. Let's have a look at this now. So now we print out true, and that's kind of the basics on variables. They can store things. So you set a variable name equal to something. Now there's a few rules with our variables. The first has to do with their naming. So when we create a variable, all we kind of have to do is just type something out and set it equal to something else. But the thing that we type out, or the variable name, has to follow these rules. It can only contain lowercase and uppercase letters, underscores, and numbers. So it cannot contain any special characters other than an underscore, and it cannot start with a number. So something like hello1 is totally valid. Hello1 equals 9. Awesome. Hello1 underscore, totally valid. But as soon as I go 1 hello, note, you can see we're getting this red squiggly line. Not allowed. We cannot start a variable with a number. But I can go ahead and do something like that. That's fine. I can put a number in between. Just follow those rules, and typically you don't really use numbers in your variable names. You're just going to use some text, maybe uppercase and lowercase letters. And in Python, if you want to do a space, because there's no spaces allowed in variable names, just use an underscore, so something like hello underscore world. This is the convention for making variables. You separate anything that's kind of 2 words using an underscore. So let's say hello equals 9, right? And then we could print out hello and we'd get the value 9. Now, of course, we can make a lot of other variables too. We can say the variable yes equals, and maybe it's equal to the string hello. I can actually do something crazy and say hello equals yes. Now, what that's saying is that hello, this variable hello is equal to whatever is stored in the variable yes. So in this case, hello will be equal to hello. Funny, right? But that's how that will work. So we can assign variables to other variables. We can do something like hello equals hello plus 9. Totally fine. And in fact, what I'm going to do now, excuse me, is I'm going to try to actually show you how we can ask the user for some input and store what they type in a variable. So now we're on to the next part, which is getting user input. So to get user input, what that means is that in the console here, we're going to let the user type something in. Because right now, if I run this, you see that it says, welcome to my first game, and then the program kind of just ends after that. Ideally, I would like to ask the user what their name is and store that in a variable. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just print it out, and then I'll talk about how this actually works. So I'm going to make a variable called name. The reason I've called it name is because it's going to store my user's name, and usually we want to name our variables something that are meaningful. And I've set that equal to input, and inside of this here, I'm going to put a string that is the question I want to ask the user. So what is your name? Question mark. Now notice I did a little space at the end. Try to think of why I would have done this space in just a second, but just keep in mind I did do this space. Just remember that. So now what I'm going to show you is what happens when I run this program. So let me move this over here. Let's zoom in. Welcome to my first game. What is your name? Let me type Tim. All right, so I typed Tim, and notice that here the cursor is going, and I can type stuff right into the console. That's because I used this input key. So what this says, if I have input, and then I put what's known as a prompt inside of here, then whenever we read this line of code, so when our program actually reads this, it will say, okay, print this out, and then wait for the user to hit enter. So let them type something whenever after we print this out, so on the same line as what is your name, and then as soon as they hit enter, we're actually going to take whatever they typed, and we're going to store it in the variable name. So if I type Tim like that, what actually ends up happening, and I'll have to zoom back out here, is that the variable name is going to be equal to Tim because I typed Tim. And then if I type Joe, the variable name is going to be equal to Joe because I typed Joe. So to prove that to you, let me print out name, because we can print out variables, right? So this variable should equal the name we typed in, and then let's just print it out. So let's have a look. What is your name? Tim. And there we go. It prints out Tim. Now notice I'm not just lying to you here. If I type Joe, it prints out Joe. So we are grabbing and storing the user's name by using this input tag. Now the next thing I actually want to grab from the user is their age. We're going to do a cool thing here that makes sure they're a certain age before we let them play the game. So let's say age equals input. And then what do you guys think we should put inside of here? Well, have a think about it for a second, because I am about to start typing. Pause if you need to. But I'm going to put, what is your age? And now what's going to happen is we're going to ask the user for their name. Then we're going to ask the user for their age, and they're going to type both of those values in. So let's run this, and let's say, what is your name? Tim. What is your age? 19. Boom. Stops. There we go. Now age will store 19 and name will store Tim. So if I want to show you those two things, what I can do is actually print them out. And I'm going to show you the last thing kind of for this video is how we print out multiple things on the same line. So let's say I wanted to say something like, hello, Tim, you are 19, right? So I want to print their name, and then I want to print their age, and I want to combine that with a few other words just to kind of welcome the user. Well, how do I do that? There's a few different ways to do it, but the way that I'm going to show you is kind of the most common, and it's something like this. Essentially, you can separate anything that you want to print on the same line with a bunch of commas. So I can do something like hello, comma, name, and what this will do is print out the string hello that we've already talked about. We understand we can print out this and it'll show the text. Then we'll print out whatever the variable name is, so whatever's stored inside of there, and this comma will automatically put a space in between them. So hello space name, where name will be equal to whatever we typed in. Then I can say, hello Tim, you are, and then I'll put age, comma, years old, like that. And there we go. That's all we need to do to print out hello, whatever their name is, you are, whatever their age is, years old. So we've just separated them by commas, and now it'll print all those things out. So let's have a look here. Let's go Tim, 19. Hello, Tim, you are 19 years old. And let's say, actually, let's just leave it like that for now. And I think with that being said, that's pretty much all I need to cover for this first video. So I hope that you guys are getting a little bit excited about this. I know we haven't gotten too far yet, but these things will start to accelerate and get faster and faster and faster. I just really need to give you guys the basics before we can jump in too deep. So in the next video, we're going to actually do a lot more stuff. We're going to actually get the game starting to function, hopefully talk a bit about conditions and some arithmetic. And then of course, in the final video, we'll be wrapping up the game, doing all the finishing touches and doing a lot more work. So if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and of course, stay tuned for the next videos in this series.